First of all, thank you for inviting me to the workshop, and I had every intention of being there in person. And unfortunately, something's come up, and I would much rather be at the workshop, but it's the way things go in life, and so I have something else that I need to go do. So,
Thanks, sir.
thanks again, though, for inviting me, and I'm really excited to be at least part of the setup of the conversation. What Stratcom really does on a day-to-day basis, as described by one of my predecessors, was Stratcom wages deterrence.
Hmm.
And when you are waging deterrence, that presents commanders with a number of extremely delicate challenges. One of those challenges is, of course, the consequences of failure, because the consequences of failure in daily operations, as well as the ultimate consequence if deterrence fails, are the voice that speaks to you over your shoulder all the time. So that consequence with nuclear weapons and that consequence with deterrence and the demands of the deterrence uh, campaign, if you will, presents people at Stratcom with, I think, psychological demands that other commands don't have. And that can really be boiled down to the tension between this endless need to deter the combat use of the weapons and the constant commitment to the readiness to do it. And so it's the great paradox of the nuclear age. Many have called it the great paradox of the nuclear age. And it's the irony of the command's motto, which is peace is our profession.
Right. Maybe what we can do is we can turn here to a bit more down into that piece of this, the questions around decision making and speed and strategic risk. I think it's incredibly illustrative to have seen the evolution of the conversation around this from the Stratcom perspective in particular, where I think for this year, perhaps the first time in the annual posture statement, there's an entire section dedicated to AI and machine learning. The combatant commander, General Tony Cotton, has publicly spoken to the fact that Stratcom is developing artificial intelligence and AI-enabled decision support tools that are going to, I believe the way it was referred to was to accelerate human decision making. But they've also been very careful to put language in there that AI will remain subordinate, that AI will subordinate to the authority and accountability mechanisms for humans that are in place. I wanted to note in that context something that some reporting that comes out of Israel in its current conflict, where technology increasingly is creating what I've heard referred to as a human bottleneck, where military targeting as AI systems can really identify thousands of targets faster than any human can approve them, and where concerns have been voiced that automation bias has crept in, and that commanders in Israel have only been able to give minimal human oversight to the Lavender AI targeting system, and that they've seen really kind of a bias towards just doing what the system tells them to do because they've got to go now. So here's the question for you, sir. You've seen firsthand how fast this landscape can change, how fast it evolves. From your perspective, how does the integration of these cutting edge AI capabilities potentially impact that nature of strategic stability? How do you think about this balance between the need for faster decision making, balance that against the need for deliberation?
So I would go back to something you said. You used the word accelerate decision making, or the words accelerate. I would prefer to say assist decision making. Somehow we have come to the conclusion that speed is an independent virtue here. And I don't know that that's true. I don't know that I'm ready to sign up to that. In some cases, I think speed is important. By the way, there's a difference between speed that doesn't have a vector and velocity that has a vector associated with it. And I think sometimes we believe that going faster is the end all be all. It isn't. I think the best decision making and being able to act ahead of your adversary is important here. But so So that gets me to the changing landscape. So look, the landscape is changing. It's changing faster and more dramatically than policy can keep up, and that procedure can keep up, and that concepts and operating concepts can keep up. And as usual, I think technology is going to take us somewhere we haven't considered or really prepared for if we don't insert ourselves in this conversation. And if we permit AI technology alone to drive the application of it, I think the consequences could be profound. So we humans have to put ourselves into this conversation. And I think what that means is we have to lay out some foundational concepts to guide the direction, not foreclose the opportunities, but guide the direction. So to me, this is about establishing some guide rails for how we adopt AI and putting our own views on what we need it to do. We can't get in the way, we can't be the bottleneck, but on the other hand, I think there's a different demand signal here because we're talking about nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
So you had asked me at one time what keeps me awake at night related to
Yeah.
NC3, and let me tell you, at the top of the list is the antique condition of the current system. It's not AI. It's the AI is on the list, but it's not the number one thing that's on my list. So think about this for a minute. If you had a child in 1985, you would expect that child to be alive today. That's human years. If you bought a car in 1985, that car would qualify to have antique license tags on it today. If you had a dog in 1985, that's dog years. That dog's not around anymore today. If you had a computer in 1985, that's computer years. And that's kind of where we are with you wouldn't operate a computer anymore in any application except we're doing that in NC3 because we have to. And so AI can help us if properly employed. And here's where I think it can help us the most. First of all, it can help by making sense out of information. We are drowning in it. And one of the biggest things that commanders face all the time is risk and ambiguity. So if AI can help us shrink the amount of ambiguity that we are dealing with, then I think that's huge. I think in that way it can help us reduce risk. And by the way, we shouldn't be afraid of AI technology. We should be embracing it for the opportunities that it brings to us, but there's a but that goes with that.
Yeah.
It also, I think, can alert us to indications and warning that maybe we would be delayed in finding out, maybe we wouldn't find out at all. I think that AI, again, can sort and sift and assess for us various amounts of information, to include data, but information writ large, and help us to understand it. And I think that's critically important. It can assist us in the rapid development of courses of action. So one of the things that we struggled with at Stratcom, what we recognized first of all and then struggled with, we recognized that if we ever are in a situation with extreme circumstances and vital national interests are at stake, and we have to use or are considering employing a nuclear weapon in combat, all of the planning that we have done with all of the pre-planned options, the likelihood that one of those options is actually going to fit the situation that we are in is pretty small. We do it, we plan and plan and plan and plan, and we have options of all different kinds and sorts, and we need to do that. But we need to be better at adaptive planning. And if AI can help us at adaptive planning, then I would be a full supporter of how it does that, providing to the humans the things that humans would try to do for themselves but couldn't do it maybe in 24 hours or 48 hours or 6 months. I think that there are all kinds of benefits there. Another place where it can help us. And by the way, I think that might be the most likely need, that and information helping us understand. There's a resilience issue here too. I think AI can help us be more resilient. I think AI can help us determine better not only an attack that's been launched against us, but the success of one that we would use in return. I think it can help us with security. It can certainly help us with network security. And so monitor networks that we are struggling with monitoring today, detect if there's something going on in those networks, and maybe even we give an artificial intelligence the rules of engagement around which they can act to defend our networks. Because that's where speed, I think, is most important. It's not in necessarily in developing a course of action, although I'd like to do that faster. It's really in acting in ways that human beings just can't act fast enough, no matter what you do. And this is something we had long conversations about cyber, and the cyber experts would say, you've got to be able to act at the speed of the internet. Well, no human being can do that. I don't care how good they are, no human being can do that. So eventually, I think artificial intelligence is going to have to be helpful in that regard. So those are the kind of things, that's the conversation I think we need to be having about what do we need the most, and then how can AI help us do that. But I also think that one of the things you all ought to be talking about is where are the guardrails?
The core considerations then, as you think about those guardrails, if they're going to integrate it into ISR capabilities that provide that reduced ambiguity, that sense making that AI can really be helpful with, what are the core considerations that you think are most crucial as folks in the room are thinking about, what are the potential risks, right? So we've talked a little bit about the opportunities. What assumptions about this should we challenge during the day today? So for the folks in the room, what advice do you have? What should they be looking at that maybe we haven't been so far?
Okay, so there are two sets of guardrails that I would keep in mind. There is value in thinking about the guardrails that are already in place when we're talking about things like AI, and whether or not, as we learn more about AI, whether those would be good guardrails for us to continue to have, even as we learn more about AI in the coming days, months, weeks, and years. Here are the two sets of guardrails that I would recommend to you.
Okay.
The first is, let's remind ourselves what are the three demands that the policymakers have placed on the NC3 system over the decades. And Peter Feaver at Duke University has 4 words that he uses about this. And I've taken those and I give him credit for it, but I think these are perfect. He uses always, never, and civilian control. So the always is nuclear weapons must always be available for use by the president. And under any condition, it doesn't matter whether we're under attack, whether we're under cyber attack. It doesn't matter if it's a bolt out of the blue. It doesn't matter if we've already absorbed an attack. It doesn't matter. Under any scenario, we must always be able to link the senior decision maker with the forces, and that's number one requisite out of the policymakers over the decades. The second one is never. The NC3 system must prevent the unauthorized or accidental or inappropriate use of nuclear weapons. And some of those border on legal decisions, certainly inappropriate use, I mean, we could argue that one all day, but the NC3 system must make sure that we have control over these, and that we are in a position to make decisions and then decide something different as time passes as well. So that's the never part. And then civilian control, that ultimately we have placed in the United States the ultimate authority to use nuclear weapons in combat in one political hand, and that is the highest elected official in the land, and that's the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. That authority at one time back in the Cold War was delegated under certain conditions. That delegation has long ago been removed. And so there's one authority here. So that's the always, never, and civilian control. Then there are the 3 big attributes that I like to remind people of that are affiliated with the NC3 system. And they are, first, Humans make the decisions. They're not just in the loop. You hear this described sometimes as humans in the loop. That's not the point. The point is that humans are making the decisions. And so, how do we put AI in the loop, I think, is the interesting question for us. But you never put AI in the decision position, because that gets to point number two. Nothing happens automatically in our NC3 system. Nothing happens automatically. So those two attributes are sort of the absolutes, and then the third attribute is it has layers of safeguards. And that gets to, I think, the question that addresses the risk most directly.
Yeah. We
must have high confidence in the NC3 system to include AI. So if we are introducing artificial intelligence into the system, and I think the way we arrive at courses of action today is separate. That's a planning system that's separate from the NC3 system. It's not directly related. It's not woven into the decision system. It's a separate planning system that we use that then brings things into the decision process. So to me anyway, putting AI in the NC3 system as opposed to using it to inform things in the NC3 system is different. Now, the NC3 system also includes warning and assessment, and so tactical warning. So how will we include AI in warning? These are the parts where we get to the risk. And so in order to dispel the risk, here's how we've done it to date. We don't take the word of a sensor for it, basically. We don't take the word of some technician who built the sensor. We don't take their word for it. If they look at us and they say, I put this new sensor in the system, not to worry, guys, it's fine. We don't take their word for it. We have a certification process. We have a way that we determine that that sensor will in fact behave the way it's supposed to, tell us what we needed to tell it, and that we know if it's telling us something wrong. So there's a certification process, and people generally hate it. It's a paperwork process generally, and it's cost money.
Yeah.
How do we do that? I don't know how we do that for artificial intelligence, but we're going to have to do it, because I will tell you this. I'm not willing to take anybody's word for it, and nor should anybody else in this enterprise be willing to take somebody's word for it. That gets back to my first point about Stratcom. The consequences of failure are so high that in this case, we can't be blown away by people who are in a hurry. And so we've got to step back from this, because I don't mind using AI for a lot of things right now. I mind a lot if we say we're going to put it in somehow into the NC3 system, or we're going to rely on it to inform our decisions at the most critical times, which is whether or not we're under attack, for example. That's why we have dual phenomenology. That's why the first question, if we think we're under attack, is what's the confidence reporting, and the commander of NORAD makes a confidence assessment. So if we're going to use AI to help the commander of NORAD determine confidence in the system, the commander of NORAD's got to be confident in AI. The final point is, ultimately, it's this risk conversation. As I said, commanders deal with risk and ambiguity. Those are always looking over your shoulder if you're a commander. So fine, I am okay with that. That comes with the turf. We can't take the risk associated with nuclear weapons to zero. It's not humanly possible.
Sure.
We drive it in that direction as far as humanly possible.
Yeah.
We can't excuse AI from that kind of a requirement and that kind of a standard. I think that we've got to hold a line here, but we've got to do it in a reasonable way. You can't ignore AI. You can't say, I'm not using that. I hate it. I don't like it. We've got to figure out the way to take, I think, these kinds of guardrails and say, all right, look, these are the fundamentals. Let's go from here. And then we will go forward, and let's decide what we needed to do for us. And then let's discuss with the experts how it's going to do it.
So, sir, and we're going to let the group get to its work here. I think what you've shared here, though, is incredibly important in terms of not just conveying the gravity of the situation to everyone in the room, but also challenging them with some questions that remain unanswered. How do we actually control AI? How do we actually make sure that we know how it works and understand if it's going to be integrated into NC3, what those accountability mechanisms are going to look like? That's a great challenge for everybody in the room there today. One final thing, maybe before we wrap it up, just to turn to you, sir. For everyone in the room, what would you leave them with? That one thought as they head into the Sonaric exercise today. What would that one thing be that you would kind of task them with?
Yeah, I would just say we go to extraordinary lengths to reduce the risk surrounding nuclear weapons to the lowest levels that we can possibly reduce it. Why would we rush to embrace the benefits of AI without understanding and dealing with its risks? And my recommendation is we should not. But here's your challenge. How should we go about doing that? How do you understand and deal with its risks? And so I think that's your challenge, and I commend you to it. And again, I'm sorry I can't be there with you. This is a wonderful subject for you to be struggling with, and I'll look forward to hearing what the workshop came up with.
Well, thank you, sir, both for the service that you've dedicated to this nation and to the security of the people of America, and for taking time with us here today. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.